Hello, everybody. Got a bit of time. I'm going to revisit the ball tampering saga. Now, I did say a bit about this at the time, and also a couple of months later, and a few months after that, as more information came out and as things just progressed. So, just a reminder, so this was 24th of March 2018. And now I'm going to start with the raw facts as people accept them, no dispute, I accept them too. So the raw fact is that on 24th of March 2018, um, in the middle, so it was the third day of the third test, Australia against South Africa. In South Africa, it was scores were level one test each. South Africa were well on top. Australia were fielding, and the cameras turned to Cameron Bancroft. In the palm of his hand, a tiny little thing. There was a piece of something. We didn't know what, but it was something secretly hidden there, and he was putting the ball in off camera, making sure that nobody could see. And you had to be there right at the time to find it. It was sneaky as hell, and yet it was obvious as hell once you saw it in your eye. So he kept it. It was in this little corner of the hand, and it was like, on one hand, it was the most obvious thing. Like once you saw it, it's the most obvious ball tampering since Shahid Afridi bit the ball in, like, I think it was a T20 match. I can't remember what year it was, but it was, and this was very obvious. But on the other hand, because of the sneaky way it did it, because it fitted neatly in the palm of his hand, so it didn't go over, so you couldn't see it. You could only see it from one angle, only dead on. It's also the sneakiest thing ever. And when he did it, I think it was Ian Botham was commentating, and he said, "What the hell?" And if that had been all it was, I reckon Cameron Bancroft probably would have got about a 3 or 4 test ban. That's all we would have heard about it. It would have been terrible that because that was the first time an Australian had ever been caught ball tampering, and I think it was a pretty severe version of it because of the sneaky nature of it. 3 or 4 tests, ball tampering usually goes from a warning up to 1 to maybe 3 tests. I think this was on the high end, so 3 to 4 tests was fair, and I think that's all we would have seen of it if that was all it was. If when the umpires came up to him, I think it was like 10 or 15 minutes later, and he just said, "Oh, here you go, here's the sandpaper," they would have gone, "What the hell are you doing? That's definitely tampering with the ball." Off you go. They would have sent him off, and he would have got charged, and he wouldn't have played for 3 or 4 tests. And I reckon what would have happened after that is that the team would have gone, "Well, why were you doing it?" And he would have said, "Oh, well, I was doing it to help the team." And we probably would have forgiven him, except for the fact that he was batting so badly that he was clearly not test level. I mean, he did get a couple of half centuries. I think that was his eighth test because he played the 5 test Ashes before that. But his average was like, was it 28, 30? Might have been 30. And look, he was replacing Matthew Renshaw, who done really well in really tough conditions. And I think Renshaw objectively was a better player at test level. Now, Bancroft did have those 2 tests, sorry, 2 first-class games before that, where he did really well. But Bancroft was only meant to be in contention for the wicket-keeping spot. Tim Payne got that. That was the vacant spot. So the reason that Bancroft came in was because Matthew Wade was doing so badly as a keeper that they wanted to replace him. And the favourite was actually Peter Neville. But and I thought Neville was going to come in as the only replacement once the Ashes started. But and he'd played for Australia before that and had done well. So I thought if Wade was out, Neville would come in. Tim Payne wasn't even playing first class cricket. He'd actually pretty much retired to focus on ODI or one day domestic and T20s because he was more of a short form player. And then they just picked him out of obscurity and they were looking because they were looking for everyone. They had like a wicketkeeper watch. They were comparing Wade to Peter Neville, and Bancroft was the third one that they were considering for the wicketkeeper spot. Now Peter Neville won. He was the best of those three, and it should have been Peter Neville in the Test side, but they looked beyond that and looked even beyond first class cricket and looked at grade cricket and said, well, Tim Payne is the one we should get straight from grade cricket to Test cricket, skipping over first class cricket. And as part of that, Matthew Wade played as a batsman with Tim Payne as the keeper, just to encourage him, which was really good of Wade. I think that really was a great thing that he did. And Tim Payne ended up being a great keeper, and he ended up as the captain of Australia for a while until, of course, we had that texting scandal and he was removed. So the only reason that anyone even was aware of Cameron Bancroft was because he was keeping wicket, although he later on abandoned that. Wasn't as an opener, because the openers, we knew who our best openers were. That was Matthew Renshaw and David Warner. There was no there was no suggestion that we needed someone else. But because Bancroft I think he got 2 centuries in two Sheffield Shield matches for Western Australia, and they impressed people so much that in spite of him not really being a regular opener, he usually batted down the order, and in spite of him not even playing for 18 months before that, they just put him into the Test team. It was a massive hunch, and I don't think anyone really liked it, because they liked Renshaw. Renshaw was in the team, and Renshaw was doing well. And I know his average was only like 36 or so, but and it ended up being worse than that after a while. But he was doing well. He was a young player, younger than Bancroft, and he was doing everything that was asked of him, and people didn't want him to go. So when Bancroft came into the team, he was unpopular. People didn't like him there because they wanted Renshaw back. And I think Warner in particular didn't like him there because it's his opening partner. And he's like, where's Renshaw? So I think a lot of it was that Warner wanted Bancroft to fail. In fact, the whole team did, because they wanted Renshaw back. Renshaw had a better attitude. He deserved the spot more. He was more talented, just simply better in every way. And Bancroft got in mainly because the selectors were looking beyond simply, it was because of the wicketkeeper spot, and because they looked at Payne, who wasn't even playing first class cricket. So if they'd simply stuck to first class cricket, to the conventional methods, you would have had Peter Neville in the side, Tim Payne wouldn't have played, and Cameron Bancroft wouldn't have played, because Peter Neville had won the wicketkeeper battle. It was all in the newspapers. There was Wade versus Neville versus Bancroft. They had Bancroft as the third option. Bancroft was not as impressive as a keeper. And then they decided to play Bancroft as an opener. And he wasn't really opening. So they put him into the wrong spot. They should have played him at 7 or 8. Now, Bancroft since then has become a proper opener, and he doesn't keep wicket anymore. But at the time, he wasn't. So it was really a very poor selection decision to pick Bancroft in the first place. And he proved that he wasn't test level, not as an opener. And in spite of everybody trying to support him, there was this growing hostility, and he was not supposed to go to South Africa. They said, okay, we've given him a full series, given him the whole Ashes, and he did really badly in the Ashes and probably cost us 1 or 2 tests. But then we took him to South Africa, and people were like, "What? We don't want him to go to South Africa." They had Renshaw in the squad. Renshaw should have played in the first test and the second and the third. Now, he did come in the fourth after this, the ball tampering, but he should have played the whole series. So that was probably the main motivator behind what Bancroft did. The fact that he was not test level, nobody in the team liked him. He wanted people to like him. And when you want people to like you, you do things to help them out. And now you might make them a cake, you might bake them some cookies, you might go out of your way to get them their favourite coffee or their favourite drink, or you sing for them, or you do all sorts of things. And in a sporting game, you can do professional fouls, and that it's not unusual to do that to help your team and to make your team like you. They do that in uh, basketball quite a lot, and this is kind of where this came from. It came from the fact that Cameron Bancroft was not legitimately in the team, and the team really hated him. And it wasn't just Warner, but it was probably more Warner than anyone else. Warner wanted Renshaw. He didn't want Bancroft. And the whole team felt that they were carrying Bancroft. They didn't really say it very much out loud, but it was certainly a very big feeling. And we had the same feeling recently in the Border Gavaskar Trophy when Nathan McSweeney was playing. And I've said before, Nathan McSweeney was being carried massively, and he played for 3 tests. I don't think there's really any doubt that we would have won the first test in Perth, if McSweeney hadn't been playing. If we'd played, Sam Constas in the first test, I think we would have won that one. And conversely, had Nathan McSweeney played in all 5 tests instead of being dropped after 3, we probably would have lost, well, all but 1 test, and we would have had that draw. So it would have been a 1-3 scoreline in favour of India. So you really do need to note that having one wrong player can make a big difference. And Cameron Bancroft got 8 tests. It's way more than he deserved. I think 1 or 2 was fair enough, and then you drop him. But they didn't. And the selectors gave him an extended run far more than he in any way deserved. And even the most optimistic, friendly commentators that were saying, oh, he's still doing it, they were struggling to justify it, certainly by the time of the 3rd test. So that was the scenario as far as Cameron Bancroft was concerned, as far as his motivation, his headspace. He was thinking, I have to do something to help the team. I have to do something to make them happy. So he had to make the captain happy. He had to make David Warner happy. And David Warner was the vice captain. Vice captaincy, bit of a meaningless title, but the vice captain, as far as cricket is concerned, is essentially meaningless unless the captain suddenly missing, and then the vice captain will step up. At least if it's a 1 test off or something like that. So short of Steve Smith getting injured, David Warner had no say in anything. In fact, not only that, but David Warner was not liked in the team. So they generally ignored him. David Warner was known as a bit of a buffhead. He said a lot of stuff that was pretty stupid. And probably the highlight of it, or the low light, was when David Warner once went to a pub or a bar in England, and that was during one of the Ashes, and Joe Root was over there putting on a fake beard, and David Warner went, "How dare you, racist," but didn't quite connect because people held him back, because he thought that that was a racist attack against Hashim Amla. Now, Hashim Amla was not there. South African player Hashim Amla, who I'm not sure of his ancestry a bit, his skin's a little bit dark, and I think he might be Muslim. I'm not sure, but that's the thing. He thought it was a racist attack, or at least an Islamophobia attack. But it was actually Joe Root and the other English players saying, well, Joe Root looks very young. He can't grow a beard. He's giving him a fake beard. It had nothing to do with it. So David Warner was quite rightly banned for a while for that. And also David Warner had said a lot of tweets that were stupid. And he was stopped from being allowed to have a social media account because his comments were so stupid and so unreasonable. And the thing is that David Warner was very righteous. So he always had this idea that anyone who wasn't completely perfect was awful. And hence the Joe Root thing, but there were a lot of other things that he'd said and did that were just stupid. And I think you can see that with his commentary, that now he's retired, he's in the commentary box. It's entertaining, a bit like Shane Warne was. Warner. There's not that much difference in personality, and they're a bit stupid. Now, that can be great. We all loved Shane Warne, and I think most people loved David Warner for his stupidity. But it sort of had a situation where the team were like, because I was sort of like, don't do that, David. And so if David Warner had told anyone in the team, do this, they would have ignored him. So the idea that Cameron Bancroft did what David Warner wanted him to do is preposterous. No one would have. The only way that could even be possible is if David Warner says, "Oh, hey mate, can you do this?" And he says, "Sure," without checking on the other 9 players to see what they would have said. All he'd have to do is to go up to any one of the other 9 players and said, "Hey, David Warner told me to do this," and they would have gone, "David Warner told you to do something. Just ignore him." The other problem is that David Warner was not a bowler. Now, the only people that benefit from ball tampering is bowlers. In fact, even spin bowlers don't benefit from it very much. It's mainly pace bowlers because they want to have one side really shiny and one side really rough. And So ball tampering is all about making one side either really shiny with like a lolly or something, or making one side rough, or both. So that's always to benefit the bowlers. Now, most of the ball tampering, well, about half and half have been batsmen, half have been bowlers. Now, so when the bowlers are doing it, they're doing it for themselves. So you have a lot of fast bowlers get caught with it. But when batsmen are doing it, they're doing it for a bowler. So, yeah, sure, some of them just do it generally for the team, but a lot of them do it for a bowler. So if you had a situation where two players were involved and one was a batsman, such as Cameron Bancroft, he's either doing it for the team or he's doing it for a bowler. He wouldn't be doing it for David Warner. David Warner is a batsman. He has no motivation to do it unless it's for the team. In which case, you'd be having David Warner telling him to do it and someone telling David Warner to do it. So the idea that it was just those two is preposterous and ridiculous and impossible. Not only that, then they've said, oh, well, Steve Smith, also a batsman. Okay, he's the captain. He might conceivably just do it for the team. But the idea that those three are the three involved, all three batsmen, none of them bowlers, none of them fast bowlers, is just insane. And people believing this because people tell them to believe it, they're not thinking. They're just not thinking. So anyway, so the situation as it happened there, he tampered with the ball, and then you're thinking the umpires are going to go there, but before that, Australia's coach Darren Lehmann on the walkie-talkie, and they saw it on the walkie-talkie. He tried to hide it from the cameras, and then they scanned down to the 12th man, who was Peter Hanscom. And Peter Hanscom, what was that about? Well, we had the investigation and said, oh, I was just tell him what the hell's going on. Really? Is that what he said? That's what he claims he said. That's what we all accepted as what he said. I don't know. I don't know what he said, but I know what we saw, which was Peter Hansen go out to the middle, say whatever he said to Cameron Bancroft. Maybe he said, what the hell? And then Cameron Bancroft takes the sandpaper, tiny little square from his hand, put it in his box. So the box is the bit in the front of the pants, stops you from getting hit by a cricket ball in such a way that would mean you couldn't have children. That's really painful for men. Women may not be aware of how painful it is, but it's really, really painful. And it does a lot of damage. So put a box down there, and he slid that inside the box. So when the umpires came out to ask him where it is, said, you've got something in your hands. He says, no, nothing. Well, in your pockets, empty your pockets. So he emptied his pockets and he pulled out a black felt sunglasses case, which was not the sandpaper. And so the umpire said, oh, all right. So what did Darren Lehmann tell him? Or what did Darren Lehmann tell the 12th man, and what did the 12th man tell him? Did he really tell him what the hell? Or did he tell him, hide that? Well, if he told him hide that, you'd think that's a bit stupid since it was on TV, but it looked like he was telling him hide that. It was looking like Darren Lehmann said, Pete, mate, Pete, go out there and ask him to hide that thing. We can't have anyone know that we tamper with the ball. That's what it looked like. And look, he said it was something different. The inquiry said it was something different. Maybe Darren Lehmann had nothing to do with it, but it looked like Darren Lehmann had a lot to do with it. It looked like that was Darren Lehmann's idea, and that Cameron Bancroft had done the wrong thing by letting him get caught. So, in other words, Cameron Bancroft had said, mate, I don't know what to do. How can I stay in the team? And Lehmann had said, mate, if you want to stay in the team, do the team thing, tamper with the ball. That's what it looked like. Is that what happened? It's what it looked like. It is what it looked like to everybody who was watching. Everybody who saw with their own eyes the evidence thought the coach told him to do it. Not Warner. Nobody in it at all thought it was Warner. Nobody thought it was Smith. People thought it was Darren Lehmann who told him to do that. People thought it was Darren Lehmann's idea as coach, saying to Bancroft, mate, if you want to stay in the team, do the team thing, tamper with the ball. He might not have said exactly get a little square and put it in your hand, but he would have said something along the lines, tamper with the ball. Or if not tamper with the ball, then do something. And that's what every single person on the planet thought when they saw that evidence. They don't think that now, but that is what they thought at the time. So what happened after that? Well, After that, so it's just a bit of distraction outside. Someone's got like a tent or something. Anyway, so after that, what happened was that then we, of course, went to the press conference. Steve Smith is the captain at the time, or was the captain at the time, and he fronted the press conference with Cameron Bancroft sitting next to him. Everybody wanted to know, what was that thing in your hand? And Steve Smith answered. He didn't let Cameron Bancroft answer that. In retrospect, he should have let Cameron Bancroft answer. He should have just said, Bancroft, tell him what it was. Because Smith said, sticky tape. Okay, sticky tape. And I remember at the time I said, oh, okay, sticky tape. So they've been honest. That's what I thought at the time. I thought there's no way that's lying. But it was lying. It wasn't sticky tape. It was sandpaper. I didn't know what it was because how could you tell? It was a little square little thing in there. It could have been anything. Smith said it was sticky tape. And then he said the leadership group had decided to do that. What did that mean? Well, we'd already seen the evidence. We thought it was Darren Lehman. But who were the leadership group? Well, it included, so the leadership group officially was Steve Smith. Um, it was David Warner, the vice captain. It was the coach, it was Darren Lehman, and the four bowlers. So all four bowlers were part of the leadership group. So that was Mitchell Starc, Josh Hazlewood, Pat Cummins, and Nathan Lyon, who are still the four bowlers today, by the way. So they would have, those seven were the leadership group. It's quite a big leadership group if you think about it. I think maybe Pat Cummins wasn't a part of it. I think it was just because he was only fairly new to the team at that stage. So it was Hazlewood, Lyon, and Starc. So those three plus Lehman as coach, plus Smith and Warner. So six. Okay, so six players or five players and a coach. Pretty big leadership group. Was that what he meant? Did he mean all of them? He never specified, and he's never specified since what he meant. What did he mean? We don't know. So in response to that, so the ICC banned Cameron Bancroft for one test, which extremely lenient under the circumstances, and they banned Steve Smith for one test. And Steve Smith got banned for one test because he lied. They called it because he said it was sticky tape when it was sandpaper. Had he said it was sandpaper, he wouldn't have been banned by the ICC. But he lied on a press conference and said it was sticky tape when it was actually sandpaper. He got a one test ban, and that's fair enough. Why did he say it was sticky tape when it was sandpaper? If he was involved, surely he knew that it was sandpaper. Why lie to a press conference? Or did Cameron Bancroft say, sticky tape? Say it was sticky tape so don't get in much trouble because sandpaper's worse. Is sandpaper worse? Well, they've subsequently tried to tell us that sandpaper's not as bad. Sticky tape's worse. Okay? So whatever the situation is, we had one thing out in the picture. He said, felt sunglasses case. That's one. So remember that I'm just going to remind you of the different stories. Story one, it was a felt sunglasses case. Story two, it was sticky tape. Story three, it was sandpaper. So we've got three stories already. Angry. And these are the three stories effectively coming from Cameron Bancroft. He's told three versions, and they're contradictory with each other. Not only that, we're having Cameron Bancroft does it by himself. That's one. We have Darren Lehman does it. That's two. We have the leadership group. That's three. And then we're having Steve Smith alone because the leadership group said no, we had nothing to do with it. So we did not have one story. We had three for what it was and four for why they were doing it and who was behind it. Now, then we had a bit of a little decision amongst Cricket Australia, and in the end, they decided to ban. They not only had Bancroft and Smith out, but also Warner. Now, David Warner was not penalised by the ICC. He never has been. He was penalised by Cricket Australia. That's Australia's cricketing body. They banned him for one test as well. In fact, all three of them were not just banned for one test, they were banned indefinitely pending an inquiry. So where did Warner come from? Again, we go back to the stage where Warner wanted Renshaw in there. Renshaw deserved the position. Bancroft didn't. He didn't like him there. But why would Warner be the one telling him to tamper with the ball? Because we know now what Bancroft has said about it. He's the only one that's spoken out of the three. And Bancroft said, "Oh, it was it to take it out on the ball." Four. That's the fourth story. What's the fifth now? We a lot of stories now. Where a lot of different versions coming from Cameron Bancroft, either directly or indirectly. And now he's saying Warner was behind it. In fact, Bancroft in his interviews never suggested that Smith had anything to do with it. How could Smith not have had anything to do with it when he's there saying it was sticky tape? Did Bancroft just lie to him? Did he lie to him and say it was sticky tape? I think pretty obvious he did. But Bancroft never admitted to that. So Bancroft's still lying to this day because he has never admitted to telling Smith it was sticky tape. So that is a lie that he's still continuing to this day. He has never told the truth about that. If he could just say, "Oh, I told Smith to say it was sticky tape when it wasn't because I was lying." If he'd said that, fine. But he's never admitted to that. He's still lying to this day. And not only that, why did Smith say it was the leadership group? No, Smith has never said anything either way, neither's Warner. The leadership group have denied it. Does Bancroft know? Does that mean that it was Lehman? Did Smith mean that it was Lehman that knew? Lehman sure looked like he knew. Well, we actually have some evidence about this that has come out. Um, it was actually out at the time, but I wasn't aware of it. So another little bit of background for this is that on the first day of the third test, four South African bowlers, so I can't remember their names right now, but they're all the four fast bowlers, were in trouble. The umpires pulled them up for tampering with the ball. Really? Yeah, they did. This was never shown on TV because South Africa's cameraman, well, South Africa, it was in South Africa, they control the cameraman, and the cameramen were instructed to turn away and film the crowd while the umpires were saying, "Hey, what are you doing? You're tampering with the ball." Now, what they meant by tampering with the ball, we don't know because they were never actually charged, but they were meant to front a tribunal at the end of the test to decide if they were guilty of ball tampering. Now, that never happened because of Cameron Bancroft, but it was going to happen. Would they have been found guilty? We don't know. It was a fairly low level that they may have been maybe getting off a warning, maybe getting a few points, maybe missing a test each, um, or maybe just one or two of them missing a test. So they would that happened first. That happened before the Cameron Bancroft. The other thing was that the second thing happened. So first was that South Africa four bowlers were accused or charged by the umpire with ball tampering. And then the second thing was that two of Australia's bowlers, Mitchell Starc and Josh Hazlewood, were shown by the cameraman tampering with the ball. They ran their spikes over the ball into the pitch. That's what Starc and Hazlewood did. We know that because South Africa's cameraman showed that live on air. So if you're in South Africa, you would have seen that. You would have been aware that Starc and Hazlewood were cheating as well. And in fact, as far as South Africa's viewers have seen, I know people in South Africa, they believe that it was not just Bancroft, Starc and Hazlewood as well. So they believe there were three Australians cheating, but the three weren't Bancroft, Smith, and Warner. They were Bancroft, Hazlewood, and Starc. Yes, Bancroft, but and yes, three people, but the other two were wrong. It wasn't Warner and Smith that were behind it. It was Starc and Hazlewood, different players. And in fact, it made a lot more sense because those two are fast bowlers. And remember, again, fast bowlers are the ones that benefit from ball tampering. Now, the thing is, why Australians aren't aware of that is because when the footage came through, the Australian broadcaster switched to commercial or switched to something else. And we never saw it. We never saw it here in Australia. It just didn't exist for us. Wasn't in any newspapers. Didn't exist. You had to go looking into South African newspapers and South African videos to see it was videoed. There was photos of it. Quite easy to find. Like what the hell? Three Australians were ball tampering. Not Warner, not Smith. Why are we blaming Smith? So was Smith referring to the leadership group as Stark and Hazelwood? That they knew because they were already, well, found guilty in the eyes of the media. Now, interestingly enough, the umpires were informed of that and they refused to charge either Stark or Hazelwood. And so their argument, according to the umpires, was that what Stark and Hazelwood had done was within the law. So they were not facing charges, just the four South Africans were. But so this was actually, you can just imagine how heated this was. South Africa saying, we did nothing wrong, you guys had three. And Australians saying, we did nothing wrong, you guys had four. So you can see why Australians wouldn't want to admit to anything when South Africa had actually done stuff that were going to get them charged. In fact, they were furious. Australians were furious that Bancroft was caught. Not that he'd done it, because that made up for what South Africa did. They were in trouble, well, they were angry that he got caught. And there was a lot of debate about whether you should have the home country get to control the cameras, because this really changed the narratives. It really perverted things, and people got the wrong idea. People in South Africa thought, oh, Australia's got three people. Oh, plus Smith and Warner makes five. Whereas Australians thought there was just Bancroft, must be Smith and Warner as well. Australians weren't aware of the four South Africans that had been charged. The players were, though. All 22 players were aware that four South Africans had been charged. All 22 players were aware that Hazelwood and Stark were accused but not charged. So as far as all the players on the ground, both sides, they all knew there were four South Africans and two Australians. Well, then plus Bancroft makes three. They knew it was 4-3. They knew there were four South Africans and three Australians. Every player there, both coaches, they all knew that. So this changes the view of it. So this wasn't just Bancroft doing it to help Warner. This was Bancroft doing it to help himself and to level the playing field, because he knew that there were four South Africans who were cheating. And I mean, again, they were never charged, or they were charged, but it never heard. They never got penalised. So maybe they weren't cheating. Maybe they would have been found not guilty, or maybe they were, because what they did was clearly less than what Bancroft did. And we also have to remember there was another scenario going on as well, because David Warner's wife, Candice, had been accused in some media of having an affair with a New Zealand rugby player called Sonny Bill Robinson. Oh, sorry, Sonny Bill Williams. And some of the crowd started wearing masks to, of Sonny Bill Williams. So they went to the ground and they wore masks and they were allowed in the masks. And Warner was like, he got really angry. Not only that, some of the South African players started teasing him about it, as you do. And he went, "Arr." And there were penalties to South African players. And then they thought, that's not fair. Why do we get in trouble? We're just teasing him. And Warner got really angry. And you remember how I was talking about the Joe Root thing? Well, there was a threat that he was going to do the same thing. That he was going to punch out one of the South African players or something like that. And he very nearly did. And there were a few players, and I don't want to say the wrong one, but I think there was one of the fast bowlers. I think it might have been Kagiso Rabada, and was it AB de Villiers was the batsman? It might have been someone else. But there were players that were antagonising him, and Warner was furious, and they actually got penalties for it. So the South African players were thinking, this is not fair. Our umpires are biasing in favour of Australia. We want to get them back. There was all that. Because, so there was a great feeling in the Australian dressing room that it was not fair that Bancroft was done like this. They were supporting him. So what then happened then, and this is why Warner got in trouble, because when they had their dressing room discussion, and we heard this reported in the media, that Warner said, you can't say you didn't know. And Mitchell Starc stood up and said, I don't want to be in a team with David Warner again. Now, that was what was reported. But was that actually what happened? Probably not. Mitchell Starc and David Warner had had an argument that had gone back at least 5 years beforehand. And this was about Warner having a bad temper with such things as trying to punch Joe Root. And when Warner was getting upset about the whole Sonny Bill Williams thing, Mitchell Starc was angry at Warner and was trying to say, calm down, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Now, we now know that what was actually the situation was that Warner was referring to Stark and Hazelwood being in trouble with the South African media. He thought that everybody in Australia knew. He didn't know that there was selective editing. So he thought that everybody in Australia knew that, and he said, you two should go forward. Not to say that you knew about Bancroft, but more to say you two had also tampered with the ball. And Stark didn't like that idea because he believed what he'd done was legal. And of course, he was never charged, wasn't even hinted at. So he disagreed with that. He thought it was unfair that he should have to take the blame for that. He was worried he'd get banned. Hazelwood didn't say anything, but he was presumably also in agreement that he didn't like Warner. Effectively, Warner was threatening to go to the media and say, hey, Stark and Hazelwood cheated too. It wasn't just Bancroft. In other words, Warner was kind of defending Bancroft in saying that, in saying, hey, in perspective, it wasn't that bad. So again, yes, Warner wanted Renshaw back, but he didn't hate Bancroft at all. So Warner got banned, and I, for one, was quite shocked because when that came down, I was like, hang on, who tampered with the ball? Bancroft. Two other people didn't tamper with the ball and got bigger penalties. So that's never happened. Now, if you look at all the other ball tampering that's happened, okay, when it's been done by a bowler, you could accept that they did it by themselves and for themselves. But half the time it was done by batsmen. They had to have been benefiting some other players because the bowlers would be going, "Oh, that's funny. It's swinging a lot more than it was before." Oh well, no, they'd know. They'd have to know. So of course they knew, and of course all the bowlers knew, and yet they've never been charged ever. Not since then either. We've had other ball tampering cases since then, and I'm sure that other players were aware. They'd be throwing the ball around. A bit shinier than it was last over. Well, a bit rougher than it was last over. Well, surely at least the wicketkeeper would realise. So there'd have to be a degree of knowledge. And Warner was right. But Stark chucked up a fuss about it. Not because Warner was telling him he had to know, because of course he had to know. But it was more because Stark was worried he'd get banned for something that he did that probably wasn't illegal. Because there is a degree of ball tampering you're allowed to do. You're allowed to rub it on your pants. You're allowed to, as long as you're not using artificial substances, you're fine. And apparently, him dropping it on the pitch was within the realm. Now, I don't know all the specifics of what's legal and what's not, but the umpires decided that that was not worth worrying about. So for Warner to say that it's something he should talk about, I think from Stark's point of view, he was saying, no, look, there is a degree of ball tampering that's legal. I've stayed within the rules. And I think Stark was right from that perspective. And this is really a part of Warner's high standards. Warner has unrealistic high standards. And this is why he wasn't allowed to tweet. This is why people control what he says. And this is why we had the Joe Root incidents and all of that sort of stuff. So Stark was right from that point of view that Warner's standards were too high. And he was effectively attacking Stark and Hazelwood. But Warner was also right from the point of view that, in perspective, that showed that what Bancroft did wasn't that bad. So Warner was actually defending Bancroft, and yet Bancroft, in interviews afterwards, blamed Warner for the whole thing. So they had all the interviews. They had a full inquiry. All the players, everybody around the team, were all interviewed, and that was their decision. But why did Warner get the biggest penalty? Because he's a loudmouth. Why did Smith get a penalty at all? Because of what he said in the press conference, and you couldn't say, you had to fit the narrative, and that had to be the narrative. So what should have happened? What should have been the penalty? I'll maintain for the original charge, just the ball tampering itself, Bancroft should have got about a 3 or 4 test ban. But what about for what happened afterwards? Steve Smith lied in the press conference. I think that should have got him a 1 test ban, and that's what the ICC did. He didn't mean to lie because he was repeating what Bancroft told him, but he still should have been smart enough to check his facts first. I think a 1 test ban was fair for Smith. For Warner, I don't think he should have got any penalty. I think in retrospect, this was a knee-jerk reaction as a bit of a cover-up. Now, for Coach Darren Lehman, I think he should have been not banned, but removed as coach. I think that his calling the 12th man to go out onto the pitch was extremely irresponsible under the circumstances. He should have stayed out of it. And I think even if he wasn't involved, and we don't know for sure that he was, in fact, there's really no evidence to suggest that he was, I still think that was very irresponsible. And we didn't. If we'd had a coach that had been more sensible, they would have stayed out of it. There shouldn't have been that call to Peter Handscomb, let alone for Peter Handscomb to go out of onto the ground. That should not have happened. So I think that we quite rightly got rid of Darren Lehman over that. I think that that was a very irresponsible move. Now, as for anyone else, I think that Mitchell Stark and Josh Hazlewood. I mean, I think Mitchell Stark making the ultimatum was unfair, and I would have probably banned Stark for a match, maybe two. And I mean, I know he got injured soon after that, so he did miss some tests, and maybe that was actually a ban. I don't think Josh Hazlewood should have been penalised because he, at least, while he did tamper with the ball, that was within reasons. He then stayed out of it. And I don't think he did anything wrong there. Now, of course, with the degree, with that was just the original ball tampering for Cameron Bancroft. I think that when he then lied to Steve Smith, I think that was a much bigger penalty. Well, actually, not only that, there was ball tampering, then he lied to the umpires. I think the lying to the umpires about that should have led to a much bigger penalty because you don't lie to umpires. It's one thing to cheat, but then to lie about the cheating and to bring out the felt sunglasses case, I think that should have at least doubled the penalty. So if we're talking about 3 or 4 tests to start with, I think we would then be talking about 9 or 10 tests, and I think realistically that's a 12-month ban. So I think that Bancroft should have got a 12-month ban for the combination of ball tampering and then lying to the umpires. Now, his lying to Steve Smith, which led to a lie in the press conference, I think should have doubled it, if not tripled it again. So I think he should have had a 3 or 4 year ban for that, for the combination of all them. And then since then, we've heard more lies from him. He has told things that, I mean, they're contradictory. So even if you just compare them with each other, he's up to at least 8 different versions, and none of them actually are possible. So none of the versions that Bancroft has mentioned have addressed why we've got the sticky tape thing. None of them have addressed why he was using felt sunglasses. None of them addressed why he put it in his box. None of them have addressed how that whole situation happened. None of them have addressed why Steve Smith was saying that it was a leadership thing. So Cameron Bancroft is definitely still lying, and so I think for that level of lying and considering the whole thing, I think he should be banned indefinitely. Now, that's not to say it will be definitely a permanent thing, but I think until he starts telling the truth. So I'd say a minimum of 7 years out of the game should be applied to him. Now, that 7 years is almost up. I would have, if I was in charge of this and knowing what I know now, I would say indefinite ban, minimum 7 years, just for international cricket. I wouldn't interfere with state or any other type or international. You know, if he wants to go to the IPL, he goes to the IPL. 7 years out of international cricket minimum, but indefinite until he starts telling the truth. That would be to Cameron Bancroft. For Steve Smith, again, 1 test ban. For David Warner, a warning. Mitchell Stark, I'd probably give about a 3 or 4 test ban for his manipulative approach towards David Warner. For Darren Lehman, I would fire him. I wouldn't ban him. I would just fire him and get a different coach. And I think that's the penalty. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, Bancroft is by far the most, like 99% of that was him. Second worst was Mitchell Stark. Third worst was Darren Lehman. Fourth worst was Steve Smith. Nobody else should get a penalty. And in fact, Steve Smith's involvement was very small. I still, I think that the ICC were right in giving him a 1 test ban. You could have conceivably gone to 2 tests, and if they wanted to strip Smith of captaincy for 12 months, I think that would have been reasonable. Because it was a really um, poor choice of how he handled the press conference, and I think that you have to be careful about how you handle press conferences as an international test captain. And Steve Smith erred in judgment. And look, in a lot of ways, that's what Darren Lehman did too. But as coach, I don't think you can just remove him for 12 months. I would be fine. I would have fired Darren Lehman over that. You might not have fired him straight away. You'd wait till you get another coach and all that. And I think that's what they did. And, I think that in reality, the penalties imposed to Darren Lehman and Mitchell Stark were imposed. And I think they've seen their penalties. Even, look, if Cameron Bancroft came out today, and it's almost the 7-year anniversary, and if he came out today and admitted to everything and gave a reasonable explanation, a correct explanation as to why he changed from why he put the um, sandpaper in his box, really why he tampered with the ball, and why he lied to Steve Smith, I would be having him considered back in the team. Now, we do need another opener. With Usman Khawaja about to retire, and with Sam Constas, we're not yet sure that he's going to be good. I don't think Cameron Bancroft is our next best opener, but he would certainly be in the reckoning. And so I think now is the time for Cameron Bancroft to tell the truth, to finally admit to it, and to accept that, that he should have been banned for 7 years from international cricket. He got off very easily, very lightly, considering what he did. And I think he needs to accept that and to admit to that. I don't think he should be penalised any further. He's served his time, he's done his damage, but I think moving forward, he needs to clear the air for himself and also for everybody else, because we're still getting situations where Smith, who's doing incredibly well, is getting called Sandpaper Boy, and we're still getting Warner getting called that, and it's damaging Australia's cricket reputation, and it is time for Bancroft to tell the truth. So I think that's what should happen. Now, I don't think it's the responsibility of Cricket Australia to tell the truth, because they've been having to have cover up after cover up. Now, I think it's correct they removed the ban on Warner captaining, and that's great. He's now in the commentary booth because he's towed the party line. He's done the team thing since then at great personal hardship, and I think we need to respect that. And we also need to respect that for Steve Smith, who's also gone through a pretty tough time. I think it was much harder on Warner than on Smith, and much harder on Smith than on Bancroft. Bancroft got off very, very easily. People saying, oh, he was thrown under the bus is not true. Doesn't make any sense. It's impossible. It's not a scenario where he was thrown under the bus. It was a scenario where he was protected. Smith protected him. Warner protected him. And they both suffered because they protected him. There was a betrayal of trust, not by Bancroft against them, not for the original ball tampering, but for the follow up. The original ball tampering was arguably the team thing to do. He took the sacrifice. If he'd taken that 3 or 4 test ban for tampering with the ball, I think that certainly the Australian players would have respected him for that. They would have said, well, you tried to help us win against a South Africa who were cheating and who were getting away with it, and you took the fall for us. Thanks for that. And I think that's what would have happened. The actual ball tampering was not that bad. There are other instances around the world. Look, I do not in any way condone professional fouls, but that is what this was. It was a professional foul. I don't think there's any way that anyone told him to do it, but I think there was a general feeling that this would help him in his career, and I think it would have if he told the truth. The main issue for Bancroft is that he lied and continues to lie. It is not the ball tampering. That was quite minor. Um, and I think the people in the Australian public are angry about the lies. And different people believe different lies. And it's unfortunate that very few people are aware of what actually happened. And they try to believe the official story, but even the official story doesn't add up. And they're frustrated about it. So they've imagined their own scenarios, and it is unfortunate. Bancroft still has a job to do, and that is to tell the truth. And I think if he does, then we could consider him on his merits, which maybe not in the Test arena because he was pretty bad, but maybe in the one day internationals. It is time for him to tell the truth. It is time for people to be clear about what happened. That's it from me. Bye bye now.